You are the absolute ruler of the most powerful civilization on Earth. Your kingdom has worshipped the same gods for over 2,000 years. Massive temples dedicated to these deities dot your land. Thousands of priests derive their power and wealth from this religious system, and you decide to abolish it all. This is exactly what one Egyptian pharaoh did around 1350 BCE. Amenhotep IV didn't just reform Egyptian religion, he attempted to destroy it and replace it with something the ancient world had never seen: the worship of one god and one god alone. He changed his own name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, moved the capital to a brand new city, and launched what some scholars call the first monotheistic revolution in human history. Today we're diving into one of the most controversial and fascinating periods in ancient Egyptian history, the Amarna period and the reign of the Heretic Pharaoh. But here's where it gets really interesting. Some scholars believe Akhenaten's religious revolution didn't die with him, that echoes of his radical monotheism survived and influenced later religions, including Judaism and Christianity. Could the worship of the Aten have been a precursor to the God of Abraham? Did Moses know about Akhenaten? To understand how radical Akhenaten's revolution was, we need to understand what he was overthrowing. Ancient Egyptian religion was polytheistic, meaning they worshipped many gods. We're talking about hundreds of deities, each with specific roles, mythologies, and cult centers. There was Ra, the sun god; Osiris, god of the underworld; Isis, the magical protector; Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship; Thoth, god of wisdom, and many, many more. These weren't abstract concepts. They had massive temples, armies of priests, vast landholdings, and enormous economic and political power. The Temple of Amun at Karnak in Thebes was one of the largest religious complexes ever built, covering over 200 acres. The priests of Amun controlled immense wealth and wielded significant political influence. Egyptian religion was also deeply woven into every aspect of life and death. The gods weren't just worshipped, they explained the cosmos, guaranteed the afterlife, protected against chaos, and legitimized the pharaoh's rule. The pharaoh himself was considered divine, the living embodiment of Horus and the son of Ra. Religious practice wasn't just temple ceremonies. Common people had household shrines, wore protective amulets depicting gods, and their entire understanding of life, death, and the universe was filtered through this polytheistic worldview. By the time Amenhotep IV came to power, around 1353 BCE, Egypt was at the height of the New Kingdom period, arguably the peak of Egyptian power and prosperity. His father, Amenhotep III, had ruled over a golden age. Egypt controlled territories from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. Wealth from tribute and trade filled the royal coffers. Everything seemed stable. The traditional religious order had worked for millennia. And then Amenhotep IV decided to burn it all down. When Amenhotep IV took the throne as a young man, probably in his late teens or early 20s, nothing seemed unusual at first. Early in his reign, he worshipped the traditional gods, particularly Amun-Ra, as expected. The Aten, the disk of the sun, had been recognized as an aspect of the sun god Ra for centuries. But Amenhotep IV began elevating the Aten above all other deities. By his 5th year of rule, he had made a dramatic break. He changed his name from Amenhotep, Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, or servant of the Aten. This wasn't just a personal preference. Akhenaten declared that the Aten was the only true god, not the chief god, not the most important god, the only god. The other gods didn't just become less important. According to Akhenaten, they didn't exist at all. What followed was unprecedented in Egyptian history. Akhenaten ordered temples to traditional gods closed. He cut off the priesthood's funding. Most dramatically, he launched a campaign to erase the names of other gods, particularly Amun, from monuments throughout Egypt. Teams of workers chiseled out the names of gods from temple walls, even in the names of previous pharaohs. Akhenaten's artistic representations were equally revolutionary. Traditional Egyptian art showed pharaohs as idealized perfect beings. Akhenaten insisted on a radically different style: elongated skull, prominent belly, feminine hips, and an unusual face. Whether this reflected actual physical features, possibly a genetic condition, or was a deliberate theological statement about the pharaoh's unique nature remains debated. But Akhenaten's most dramatic move was yet to come. Around year 5 or 6 of his reign, he announced he would abandon Thebes, Egypt's traditional capital and the center of Amun worship, and build an entirely new capital city dedicated solely to the Aten. The site he chose was virgin land in Middle Egypt, untainted by association with the old gods. He called it Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten, known today as Tel el Amarna. In an astonishing feat of organization, a complete capital city with palaces, temples, administrative buildings, and residential neighborhoods was constructed in just a few years. Akhenaten marked the boundaries of his new city with massive stone stelae, 14 monuments carved into the cliffs surrounding the site. These contain some of our most detailed information about his religious ideology and intentions. He swore by oath that he would never leave the boundaries of Akhetaten, that he and his family would be buried there, and that the city would be the Aten's eternal home. Akhenaten didn't do this alone. His great royal wife, Nefertiti, whose famous bust is one of the most recognized artifacts from ancient Egypt, played a crucial role. She appears in religious reliefs performing rituals usually reserved for the pharaoh, suggesting she may have been co-regent or held unprecedented religious authority. The royal family became central to Atenism in a way that was new for Egyptian religion. Akhenaten and Nefertiti had 6 daughters, and the family was depicted in intimate, affectionate scenes unprecedented in royal art. The message was clear: only the royal family could directly access the Aten, and everyone else approached the god through them. This created a religious hierarchy where Akhenaten stood as the sole intermediary between humanity and divinity, a position with interesting parallels to later monotheistic traditions. So what was life actually like in Akhenaten's revolutionary city? Thanks to extensive archaeological work at Amarna, we have an unusually detailed picture of daily life during this period. Akhetaten was built according to a grand plan. The great Aten temple dominated the city center, but it was completely different from traditional Egyptian temples. Instead of dark, mysterious inner sanctuaries, the Aten temple was open to the sky, with hundreds of offering altars exposed to the sun. There were no cult statues. The Aten could not be represented in human or animal form, only as the sun disk. The royal palace complex was enormous, with painted floors, walls decorated with nature scenes, and innovative architectural features. The king and queen appeared daily at the window of appearances to distribute rewards and receive petitions, making the pharaoh visible in ways that contrasted with the remote divinity of traditional kingship. But Amarna wasn't just royal buildings. Recent excavations have revealed extensive residential neighborhoods, workshops, and even a workmen's village. We can see how different social classes lived, what they ate, what crafts they practiced, and even read their personal correspondence. Speaking of correspondence, one of the most important discoveries at Amarna is the Amarna letters, a cache of nearly 400 clay tablets containing diplomatic correspondence between the Egyptian court and rulers throughout the Near East. Written in Akkadian cuneiform, the diplomatic language of the time, these letters provide invaluable insights into international relations during Akhenaten's reign. And here's what's troubling. Many of these letters are pleas for help from Egyptian vassals in Canaan and Syria, complaining that they're under attack and begging for military support. Akhenaten appears to have largely ignored them, so focused on his religious revolution that he neglected Egypt's empire. The letters mention groups called the Habiru, causing trouble in Canaan. Some scholars have speculated about connections to the Hebrews, though this remains highly controversial, and most experts are skeptical of direct links. The art produced at Amarna is instantly recognizable. The Amarna style was naturalistic in ways Egyptian art had never been, showing people in movement, depicting the royal family in intimate moments, capturing individual physical features rather than idealized forms. We see scenes of musicians playing, workers building, servants bringing offerings, children playing, a window into life that feels more immediate than the formal, eternal scenes of traditional Egyptian art. Recent excavations have focused on non-elite areas. We've found bakeries, breweries, pottery workshops, and evidence of what people ate and how they lived. Interestingly, artifacts show that while the official religion was exclusively Atenist, common people still kept amulets and objects associated with traditional gods, suggesting the religious revolution was more complete at the elite level than among ordinary Egyptians. To understand Akhenaten's theology, we need to look at the religious texts from Amarna, particularly the famous Great Hymn to the Aten. This hymn was found inscribed in the tomb of Ea, one of Akhenaten's officials, who would later become Pharaoh himself. It's attributed to Akhenaten personally, and it's one of the most beautiful and sophisticated religious texts from ancient Egypt. Let me read you some excerpts. Beautiful you rise upon the horizon of heaven, O living Aten, creator of life. When you set in the western horizon, the land is in darkness, in the manner of death. When you rise, they live, they thrive for you. All distant lands you make their life. You have set a Nile in heaven, that it may descend for them. How manifold it is, what you have made. They are hidden from the face of man. O sole God, like whom there is. In 1887, scholars noticed remarkable similarities between the Great Hymn to the Aten and Psalm 104 from the Hebrew Bible. Listen to these lines from Psalm 104. O Lord, how manifold are your works! In wisdom you have made them all. When you hide your face, they are dismayed. When you take away their breath, they die. When you send forth your spirit, they are created. The parallels in structure, imagery, and even specific phrases are striking. Both describe the deity as the sole creator, use similar imagery of light and darkness, describe the deity providing for all creation, and emphasize the universality of the divine care. This has sparked intense scholarly debate. Did Hebrew psalmists know about the hymn to the Aten? Was there some common literary or theological tradition? Or are these simply natural ways that ancient Near Eastern people expressed monotheistic ideas about creation? The theology of Atenism itself is fascinating. Was it true monotheism, believing only one God exists? Or was it henotheism, worshipping one God while acknowledging others exist? Or even monolatry, demanding exclusive worship of one God? Akhenaten's texts seem to go beyond henotheism. He doesn't just elevate the Aten above other gods, he denies the existence of other gods entirely. The Aten is described as the sole God without equal, the creator of all things, universal, God of all peoples and lands, not just Egypt, formless, represented only by the sun disk, not human or animal form, the source of all life and breath. This represents a complete break from traditional Egyptian theology, which was comfortable with multitudes of gods, complex divine relationships, and gods who could take various forms. Atenism was radically simplified and universal in a way unprecedented in ancient Egypt. So what happened to this revolutionary experiment in monotheism? How did Akhenaten's reign end? The details are frustratingly unclear. This period of Egyptian history was deliberately obscured by later rulers. But we can piece together the basics. Something went wrong in the later years of Akhenaten's reign. Nefertiti disappears from the record around year 14. She either died, fell from favor, or possibly became co-regent under a different name. Some evidence suggests a co-regent named Nefertiti, possibly Nefertiti herself, or perhaps their daughter Meritaten, ruled alongside or after Akhenaten. When Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE, after about 17 years of rule, he was succeeded by a young boy named Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten. This was probably his son, though the exact family relationships remain debated despite DNA testing of the royal mummies. The boy king ruled under the influence of powerful advisors, including and the general Horemheb. Within a few years, dramatic changes occurred. The young pharaoh's name was changed to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The court moved back to Thebes, and a decree announced the restoration of the traditional gods. The restoration stela of Tutankhamun describes Egypt under Akhenaten in dire terms. The temples and cities of the gods and goddesses were fallen into decay, and their shrines were fallen into ruin. The gods had turned their backs upon this land. Akhetaten was abandoned. The beautiful capital city that Akhenaten swore would last forever was deserted within a few years of his death. People left so quickly that archaeologists have found personal belongings, tools, and even food left behind. But it got worse for Akhenaten's legacy. Later pharaohs, particularly Horemheb, who became king after Tutankhamun's death, launched a systematic campaign to erase Akhenaten from history. His name was chiseled out of monuments. Official king lists skipped from Amenhotep III directly to Horemheb, as if Akhenaten, Nefertiti, Tutankhamun, and had never existed. Akhetaten's monuments were torn down, and the stone blocks were reused in other construction projects, ironically preserving thousands of carved blocks called talatat inside later buildings, where archaeologists have rediscovered them. Later texts referred to Akhenaten simply as that criminal, or the heretic of Akhetaten. His religious revolution was treated as a dark period when Egypt had been led astray from the proper worship of the gods. The erasure was so successful that Akhenaten was essentially forgotten for over 3,000 years. It wasn't until the 19th century, when European archaeologists began excavating Tel el Amarna, that this fascinating chapter of Egyptian history was rediscovered. Modern science has tried to answer lingering questions. In 2010, DNA analysis of royal mummies confirmed relationships within Akhenaten's family, though many mysteries remain. We still don't know exactly how Akhenaten died, where his mummy is, the royal tomb at Amarna was vandalized in antiquity, or what medical conditions he may have had. Now we come to the controversial question: did Akhenaten's monotheistic revolution influence later religions, specifically Judaism, and through it, Christianity and Islam? Let me be clear up front, this is highly speculative, hotly debated, and most mainstream scholars are extremely skeptical. But the theory has been proposed by serious researchers, so let's examine it carefully. The most famous proponent of this connection was Sigmund Freud, who published Moses and Monotheism in 1939. Freud argued that Moses was actually an Egyptian priest of the Aten who, after Akhenaten's death and the persecution of Atenism, led Aten worshippers out of Egypt and transferred the monotheistic religion to the Hebrew people. The timing is challenging but not impossible. Akhenaten ruled around 1350 to 1336 BCE. The traditional date for the Exodus, if it occurred as a historical event, is debated, with estimates ranging from about 1500 BCE to 1200 BCE. If the Exodus occurred in the 13th century BCE, it would be a few generations after Akhenaten, but conceivably within cultural memory. However, there are substantial problems with the connection theory. 1. Timing gaps. Several generations separate Akhenaten from any plausible date for Moses. 2. Complete erasure. Atenism was so thoroughly suppressed that it's unclear how knowledge could have been transmitted. 3. Theological differences. Hebrew monotheism developed unique characteristics not found in Atenism: personal covenant, relationship, ethical monotheism, concern with justice, and law. 4. No direct evidence. There are no Egyptian texts linking Moses to Akhenaten or Atenism. No Hebrew texts acknowledging Egyptian influence. And 5. Alternative explanations. Hebrew monotheism could have developed independently through its own religious evolution. What we can say with more confidence is that Canaan, where the Hebrews emerged, was under Egyptian cultural influence for centuries. Egyptian ideas, religious concepts, and cultural practices were well known in the region. So indirect influence through general cultural diffusion rather than direct transmission is quite plausible. It's also worth noting that Akhenaten wasn't working in a vacuum. There were tendencies toward solar monotheism and the elevation of supreme deities in various ancient Near Eastern cultures during this period. Perhaps both Atenism and later Hebrew monotheism were drawing on broader cultural currents rather than having a direct causal relationship. As for connections to early Christianity, these are even more indirect and speculative. Early Christianity emerged from Judaism, so any Egyptian influence would be filtered through centuries of Jewish religious development. Some scholars have noted that early Christian monasticism drew on Egyptian ascetic traditions, and Christian theology was debated and formulated extensively in Egypt, particularly Alexandria. But connecting these to Akhenaten specifically requires multiple leaps of logic. The scholarly consensus today is that while the connections are intriguing to consider, there's insufficient evidence to claim direct influence. Hebrew monotheism developed its own character through centuries of religious evolution, prophetic tradition, and historical experience. Any Egyptian influence, if it existed, would be one minor thread among many in a complex tapestry. So what can we confidently say about Akhenaten and his religious revolution? We know that around 1350 BCE, an Egyptian pharaoh attempted something unprecedented: the replacement of Egypt's ancient polytheistic religion with the worship of a single, universal, formless deity. This lasted about 20 years before being violently suppressed and nearly erased from memory. We know that archaeological evidence from Tel El Amarna gives us an unusually detailed picture of life during this revolutionary period, from royal palaces to workers' villages, from diplomatic correspondence to artistic masterpieces. We know that Akhenaten's religious texts, particularly the great hymn to the Aten, express a sophisticated monotheistic theology with remarkable literary parallels to later biblical texts. We know from scientific analysis that Akhenaten's family had genetic relationships we can now trace, though many mysteries about succession, identity, and cause of death remain. We know that Akhenaten's successors went to extraordinary lengths to erase his memory, so successfully that he was essentially forgotten for over 3,000 years. What we don't know and may never know with certainty is whether Akhenaten's religious ideas influenced later monotheistic traditions. The connections are tantalizing, the parallels are real, but definitive evidence is lacking. But perhaps the most important lesson isn't about direct influence. It's about what Akhenaten demonstrates about human religious thought. Here we have clear evidence that monotheistic ideas emerged in the ancient world earlier than many people realize, independent of the biblical tradition. Akhenaten's revolution failed in his own time, suppressed by a religious establishment too powerful to be overthrown. But the questions his reign raises remain fascinating. How do religious revolutions begin? Why do some succeed while others fail? How do ideas travel across cultures and centuries? And what role does individual vision, even radical, controversial vision, play in shaping human history? Whether or not Moses knew about Akhenaten, whether or not the Hebrew Psalms borrowed from Egyptian hymns, Akhenaten stands as a testament to the power of religious ideas to transform and threaten entire civilizations. If you enjoyed this exploration of ancient Egypt's heretic pharaoh, please hit that like button and subscribe. We have upcoming videos on the reign of Tutankhamun, the construction of the pyramids, and the mystery of the Sea Peoples. Do you think Akhenaten influenced later monotheistic religions? What aspects of the Amarna period fascinate you most? And what other controversial historical theories should we investigate? Thanks for watching, and remember, the past is never simple, and the most interesting questions often resist easy answers.